1. This was something that happened over the course of last summer. I take on a lot of babysitting jobs when I'm home from college. At the beginning of last summer, a family I regularly babysat for recommended me to the Smith family, with 4 children, aged 18 months, 3, 6, and 10 years. Mrs. Smith didn't really have any rules for the kids. They would eat whatever they wanted, and she didn't mind if they were glued to the TV all day. She even encouraged me to bring my laptop and spend time working on my summer classes if I needed to. I was to stay with them 3 days a week from 8 a.m. to around 7 p.m. The only rule that Mrs. Smith had was never to let them play in the front yard. She explained to me that the people across the street had a son about my age that lived at home. She didn't know much about him or his family, but she said there had been multiple instances of him trying to talk to the kids, and something about him really freaked her out. If that was my only rule, I figured this would be easy enough. I loved the kids, but the oldest one seemed to always be causing trouble. She was too old to be misbehaving in the way she did, and it drove me nuts. The 5-year-old had some sensory issues that would cause her to have really bad meltdowns if she got overwhelmed, and the 10-year-old loved to provoke her. Luckily, I didn't have to deal with the 10-year-old too much, because she kept to herself for the most part. Anyway, I quickly began to understand what Mrs. Smith was talking about regarding the guy across the street. He hardly ever left the house, and I knew because she had pointed out which car was his. I'd sometimes look out the window and see him standing in his driveway just looking at the Smith's house. Mrs. Smith would always have me pick up her packages from the porch and bring them inside. One day, I apparently hadn't realized the mailman had left a package, and I heard a knock at the door. When I looked through the peephole, the guy was standing on the porch holding a package in his hand. Though the kids were in the fenced backyard, I still didn't feel comfortable answering the door, and I figured Mrs. Smith would rather have a stolen package than anything happen to me or the kids. I was anxious for him to leave, but he stood there knocking for nearly 15 minutes. Still, I didn't open the door, and he eventually did return to his house across the street, leaving the package on the porch. I insisted that the kids spend the rest of the afternoon inside, as I was afraid he would try to get into the backyard. There were other little weird instances. Every day that I left, the kids would all stand on the porch waving and saying goodbye right before I drove away. There were 2 times toward the end of the summer that the guy would see this, then start crossing the street and try talking to the kids, who were quickly pulled in the house by Mrs. Smith. I knew this wasn't uncommon, and Mrs. Smith had mentioned to me that they had allowed the kids to play outside when they first moved into the house, only for them to find the guy talking to them in the yard. My last time babysitting for them before I moved back to school, I experienced the scariest incident I had ever had while babysitting. It was around 1, and the kids had finished eating lunch. For a while I had all 4 of them in the living room, and they were all running around chasing each other. After about 20 minutes I realized I'd lost track of the 10-year-old. I don't know why I was concerned, because she usually spent the afternoon in her room, but I decided to go check. She wasn't there. In fact, she wasn't anywhere in the house. I checked every room, the front yard, and the backyard, figuring she was hiding from me to be funny. I'm panicking at this point, and the kids are picking up on it. I make one more run through the whole house and its perimeter, screaming her name. "If you're hiding somewhere, you need to come out or I'm calling 911. This isn't funny, and I'm calling the police right now." No answer. I immediately gather the kids around me and call my mom, crying and explaining that one of the kids is gone. She knew about the guy across the street, and she was just as terrified as I was that my worst fear had been confirmed. She instructs me to call Mrs. Smith and ask if there's anywhere she could be. When I do, Mrs. Smith is irritated and tells me to go to the garage, where I put the phone on speaker. I figured this was a waste of time, as I'd already thoroughly searched the garage. However, after about 5 minutes of Mrs. Smith screaming over the phone that she needs to come out now, the 10-year-old appears from a moving box at the bottom of the pile of boxes that was as high as the ceiling, laughing her head off like it was funny. Mrs. Smith assured me that she'd be punished for what happened, but I knew that if this hadn't been my last time babysitting for them, I wouldn't come back. Anticlimactic, right? Well, 2 weeks after I moved back to school, Mrs. Smith texted to inform me that the guy across the street had been arrested for an encounter he had with another child down the street. and to thank me for keeping the kids safe. She didn't give me any details, but my blood ran cold. I'd felt bad after the incident with the 10-year-old for believing that guy could have done something to her, but, as it turns out, he was capable of it, and just hadn't gotten the chance to try anything with the Smith kids. So creepy guy across the street from the Smiths, let's not meet, and more importantly, stay the hell away from the Smith kids. 2. For some context, I was a 17-year-old girl in college at the time of this story. One semester I had this awesome schedule wherein I didn't have class every Friday, so I usually spent that day hanging out with my then boyfriend. On this particular Friday, I had to meet my friends at school for group work. Probably 2 hours later, we were done and I spent the rest of the day with my boyfriend. My boyfriend couldn't send me home because he had an important thing to attend at 6 p.m., so he dropped me off at this particular mall around 5 p.m. I already told my dad beforehand to pick me up after he got off work. My dad agreed, so I waited. I walked around like any teenager, but unfortunately my period started and I had the worst cramps ever. The kind of cramps that rendered me immobile. I was on the second floor and I spotted a bench on the ground floor. Now this bench was beside the mall fountain and about 50 steps from an entrance and exit. My dad usually picked me up from this entrance, so I wished I had asked, that he would pick me up from there. I went down the escalator and I noticed a man hanging around the railings just admiring the fountain. I didn't care too much because a lot of people do that. I finally settled down because my cramps were getting worse. Mind you, a lot of people were hanging around this area. It was fairly crowded, so I didn't feel off just sitting there alone. I didn't feel too good, so sitting there at that time seemed like a good idea. I played a game on my phone to pass the time. After a few minutes of sitting down, probably around 15 minutes or so, this middle-aged man sat beside me. I looked at him, and I realized that it was the same guy checking the fountain. This bench was long, and no one was sitting on the other side. Being naive, I didn't say anything and ignored him. Then he started talking to me. "What's your name?" I smiled because I didn't want to be rude and answered him some fake name. Then he asked what I was doing, which I answered, just playing a game. Then he said, "Can you show me how to play?" I smiled nervously and just stopped playing. I started looking around, tapping my foot out of anxiety. Then he started saying stuff like, I have money. I worked really hard to save up. And you're pretty young, so you gotta start saving up while you can, and I know I don't look like much, but my account says otherwise. Mind you, I didn't even ask him anything. He just kept rambling about his money. Gradually, he got closer. Then he asked, "So, do you have a boyfriend?" I replied, "Yeah, I do. He's on his way now." Then he said, "A pretty girl like you shouldn't be waiting this long. Let me take you home." When he started saying these things, my heart started to race. I nervously laughed and said, "No thanks, he's on his way." Then he asked, "Where do you live? I'll take you there. I don't mind spending for you." I kept trying to maintain a distance between us, but he kept inching closer to me. Then he said, "I don't have a lot of money, but I can give you the whole world." I was getting so scared, so I stood up and started walking away. Unfortunately, this man started following me. I picked up the pace and started brisk walking at this point. He did too. I saw a mall guard by the entrance of the mall, so I ran to him and just stood beside him. He was probably confused, but didn't say anything. Unfortunately, the sight of the mall guard didn't exactly deter him. He stood by this pillar across from me and just waited. I was so determined not to leave the mall guard, who was busy inspecting bags. The man probably waited for 3 minutes before he walked up to me. At this point, I was in tears, like, why wouldn't he leave me alone? He walked up to me, grabbed my hand, and kissed me on my cheek. He said, "It was nice meeting you," and used the fake name I gave him, and walked away. I started crying at this point, and the mall guard asked me if I knew this guy. He asked me several questions and said he didn't intervene because he thought I knew him. He noticed that I was extremely uncomfortable, and asked if I wanted to give a statement with the head mall guard. The mall guard was able to take a good look at the old man, and wanted to do some sketch so the other guards would be alerted. I declined, since my dad was waiting for me at another entrance at the opposite side of where I was. The security guard let me go, and I ran so fast to where my dad was waiting. I never told my parents because I was scared they'd get mad. I'm 26 now and still walk around that mall alone. But I never sat back on that bench in fear that guy was still lurking around. To the mall, stalker. Let's not meet again. 3. This happened about 2 years ago and still scares me when I think about it. First, a little background. My name's Jesse and I live in the UK, and I'm from a smallish area, nothing fancy. I'm 18, and at the time I was 16 and working at a family friend's pub collecting glasses. I'd work from 7 to 11 at night, and I lived about half an hour to 45 minutes away. To get home, I had to walk through a park. Now, this park had 3 entrances and exits, 2 at the top and 1 at the bottom, which led into the town centre and main shopping area. The top 2 led to 2 different areas. One is a skate park, and the other is literally right next to a comprehensive school and a big field. This park had a lot of buses and trees in it, and only has a few lights. These lights shut off at around 10. Only lights on are the lampposts outside each entrance to the park, which are very dim. Each entrance was a big gate, and they were always open. This is important for later. I had to walk the path that led towards the school since it was the fastest way home. On to the story. I worked at the pub for a year and stuck to the same routine going home. Not smart, I know. I'd leave at around 11 sometimes, a few minutes before, sometimes a few minutes after. It took about 10 minutes to get to the park, so I'd be walking through the park at around half 11 sometimes, or 15 minutes past. Now, the one entrance I'd used to get into the park was the one at the bottom, the one that leads to the shopping area. It had 1 lamppost outside the gate, and that was it. That was the only thing that I could see about 10 foot into the park, and there were benches. No one was ever in the park when I walked through it from work. During the autumn and winter weeks it was always empty, even the trees were. So you can imagine my shock when I see a man sitting on the bench as I walked through the park gates. Now this was so strange. It's around 45 minutes past 11, almost 12 at night. It's pitch black and freezing, and this dude was just sitting on the bench. I couldn't see him too well at first, but as I got closer I got a good look at him. He was young, about 20, 25, long hair in a ponytail, but not a scruffy one, tight and neat. He had a hoop earring and his nose was pierced. I can't remember his eye color. He was so pale, and his hair was jet black with red tips, which went past his shoulders. He wore all black. He dressed like an emo, to be honest. Looking back now, he kinda reminds me and looks like Dracula from the movie Van Helsing. He was on his phone and looked up at me as I walked towards him, and he just stared at me as I walked past. I gave him a slight nod and smiled and kept walking. He just looked me up and down smirking, which freaked me out. He didn't say anything, and I managed to get home and didn't think much of him and forgot about it. The next night I went to work, finished my shift, and walked through the park. And again, he was there, on his phone, wearing all black, hair in a ponytail. He looked up and saw me and smiled. I smiled back, but walked a bit faster past him. Again he said nothing. This happened the next night, but on the 4th night he wasn't there. I walked through the park as usual, but I felt so uneasy. It was pitch black, no light except for the moon, and what do I hear? Footsteps, quick footsteps behind me. So I turn around and nothing, absolutely nothing. I wasn't taking any chances, so I ran through the park, and I swear, over the sound of my heart beating fast, and my footsteps, I hear twigs snapping and leaves crunching. After that, I started getting a lift home for about 2 weeks from a friend. Then that friend went on holidays, so I had to start walking home through the park again. First night, which was Monday night, the man wasn't there, but I still felt uneasy, like I was being watched. Second night he was there, sitting on the bench, smiling, looking at me, but this time he spoke. In a very deep voice he said, "Hey baby, love the tights and skirt. Damn." I was wearing a black skirt and sheer tights, with thick black thigh-high socks and Doc Martens, with a black leather jacket and thick scarf. I had to wear all black for work. I looked at him awkwardly, smiled, and hurried away. The next few nights he'd be in the park and make sexual comments, but always sat on the bench. I'd try and get lifts home when I could, but I'd still have to walk through the park most of the time. Lord, I hated that walk. One night things escalated. I walked through the park as usual, and again he was there, sitting, smiling at me. I did my best to ignore him as he made comments about my body and what he wanted to do to me. As I was walking away, I was out of the light and could only see 2 or 3 feet in front of me. I must have been about 20 feet away when I heard running behind me. I turned around and bam! Someone runs into me full speed and knocks me to the floor. I felt a heavy weight on me, and instantly I feel hair on my face and a hand over my mouth. A familiar deep voice tells me not to fight and that it'll be over quicker if I don't fight. It's him, he's on top of me, and his hands start to wander down my tummy, and he starts to lift my skirt up. I hear his zipper, and he's rambling about how he knows I want this and how he's been waiting to do this for so long. He took his hand off my mouth, and that's when I took my chance. I bit him real fucking hard, and he screamed. He sat up off me, and I could barely see as he was holding his hand and cursing at me. So I took that opportunity and pushed him off me and got up. I started to run, and I heard him running after me. I ran towards the first gate, the one I usually used to leave, and was shocked and mortified to see it was locked somehow. I could see it had a lock on it because the lamppost on the other side shone onto the usually open gate. I was so confused, but I could hear him shouting, and I started to run again, and I ran towards the other gate, and it was closed, but not all the way. There was a small gap. So I squeezed through. This was the skate park gate. I just managed to squeeze through as he tried to grab me, and I turned and looked at him for a few seconds, catching my breath. He stared at me, and then started to try and fit through the gate, so I booked it as fast as I could. I ran towards the skate park path. The skate park was full of bushes on one side of the path that ran through it. It also has a long, dark path, which, after about a 20-minute walk down it, leads to a main road, but it's usually completely dead. I ran through the skate park and hid in the bushes waiting for him. Since I had ran onto the long path, I'd be visible, and he'd be able to see me and chase me. And since no one was around, I'd stand no chance. The path that led to the roads had very few lights, but still had enough so he'd see me and be able to find me. I sat in the bushes, hiding with my hand over my mouth. I sat for a minute. When I'd seen him running through the skate park looking for me, he slowed down near the exit path, which leads to a long path. And he literally stood there for a minute, sniffing the air. No joke, he was sniffing the air. His hair wasn't in a ponytail anymore. It was all over. He wasn't wearing a coat. He wore a long-sleeved shirt, all black. It was winter, which confused me, since it was so damn cold. He looked around, and I felt his eyes scan me. Then he kept looking and started walking down the long path. After about 10 minutes, I felt it was safe and ran back towards the park, and ran into the park, and ran to the gate I usually go through to get home. It was still locked, so I climbed over it. I walked towards the school following the path I always used and had a strange urge to look back, and there, at the gate, the man was standing, just standing, watching me. He laughed and said, "I'll catch you one day, baby girl, mark my words." And he blew a kiss and walked away into the darkness. I have never been so scared in all my life. I booked it home and told my mum what had happened. She called the police and council and asked why the fence was locked. The council was just as confused as I'd been, because they never locked the gate, ever. The police couldn't do much. They put a warning out, and that was it. The creepy thing was, he had to have learned my pattern. He had to have known I used the park every night to get home. It creeps me out to this day knowing I was being watched, and could have been assaulted or worse. I still have nightmares from what happened, and wonder what could have happened to me had I not gotten away, or had he seen me in the bushes. I quit working at the pub, and haven't used the park since. So, creepy park guy, let's not meet ever again. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 489. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. I think I'm entering the lazy, don't care stage of isolation, and I'm now getting into the, well, I may as well work. Get some work done early, and if I do, then, well, great, tomorrow, I will continue to work, and I'll keep working until I don't want to do any more. Usually what I do is, if I have time on Monday, I'd record a little audio, but I might actually end up doing, the Tuesday, Wednesday videos now, which is either early on Monday morning or late on Sunday, depending how you want to look at it. Doing it early either way. And if I do, that means I can get a jump on the Thursday, Friday videos. I've got most of what I need for paranormal. I just need to decide what I'm doing on Thursday, though. Let's see, we had... Well, this will be Wednesday this goes up. We had fast food and retail yesterday. I'll put out feelers and see what I get. Usually I like to see if I want to try and get Thursdays and Tuesdays stories together, just so they're ready to roll whenever I'm in the mood. And of course I'll have to put out feelers right now, so I'll probably start sending messages on Monday, just so I've got time to try and get put together a spinning plates. Last week's was a little bit harder than usual to put together, but the fact of the matter is there's just less stories right now because the restaurants aren't open. But I shall try, and if I can't put together a spinning plates, I will put together something fun, though. I will do my best to keep you entertained. Okay, I think I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.